Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to dive into a really fundamental economic force. That is, the powerful and, honestly, pretty predictable link between the cost of borrowing money and the health of our entire economy. Okay, let's start with a pattern you've probably noticed out in the real world. It's this strange, almost predictable dance that happens between economic downturns and the cost of borrowing. I mean, have you ever wondered why, when the economy stumbles, interest rates seem to fall right alongside it? You can see it in this cycle, right? Before a recession hits, interest rates are usually pretty high. Then, bam, the economy enters a downturn and they fall, only to start climbing back up when things get better. This is absolutely not a coincidence. There's a powerful, almost mechanical connection at play here. So, to really get what's going on under the hood, we need to open up the economist's toolkit. And today, we're going to pull out one of the most fundamental tools inside, a concept that helps explain this exact cycle. You see, economists use this framework called the ISLM model to map out the economy in the short run. Now, I know, it sounds a little complex, but today we're just going to build the first and honestly most crucial piece of it together, what's known as the IS curve. So, what is this thing? Well, simply put, the IS curve shows us every possible combination of interest rates and total economic output where the market for stuff, goods and services, is in perfect balance. Think of it like a map that shows us how the real economy, the things we actually buy and sell, responds to changes in the cost of money. And to build this map, we have to start with a really simple choice, a choice that pretty much every business faces when it's thinking about the future. Yeah, put yourself in the shoes of a business owner for a second. When would you be more likely to take out a big loan to build a new factory or buy a bunch of new equipment? When borrowing is super expensive? Or when it's cheap? It's a pretty straightforward trade-off, right? When interest rates are high, borrowing is expensive, so fewer of those big, ambitious projects actually make financial sense. Business investment stays low. But when those rates drop, borrowing gets cheap. Way more projects suddenly look profitable, and, you guessed it, investment spending goes way up. Now, here's the kicker. That single decision, to build a factory or not, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It creates a ripple effect. More investment means more jobs, more materials being purchased, and just more overall spending. Economists have a name for this total spending. They call it aggregate demand. Okay, let's actually visualize this. Let's see how these two pieces, the interest rate and the total spending it sparks, come together to form our economic map, the IS curve.
So let's start with a snapshot in time. Imagine interest rates are high. At this high rate, the economy finds a kind of balance point, a certain level of total national income where the amount of stuff being produced equals the amount being bought. Let's go ahead and mark that point on our map. Okay, now what happens if interest rates are lowered? Well, like we just said, a lower rate makes it a whole lot cheaper for businesses to borrow money for those new projects. And that cheaper borrowing, of course, encourages more investment. More investment leads to more spending all throughout the economy, which pushes it to a new, higher balancing point, a point with a higher level of total income. And right there, that's the key. We now have 2 points on our map, one with a high interest rate and lower income, and another with a low interest rate and higher income. The line connecting these 2 points, and all the other possible points just like them, is the IS curve. It's this downward sloping line that perfectly illustrates that inverse relationship. So we have our downward sloping curve. Great. But its shape, how steep or flat it is, that tells an even more interesting story about how sensitive a particular economy is to changes in interest rates. Just look at this comparison. An economy with a flatter IS curve is super responsive. A tiny little cut in interest rates can cause a huge jump in output. But an economy with a steep curve, that's the opposite. You could slash rates and only see a small bump in activity. The slope really reveals how much bang for your buck a rate change is going to have. So what actually determines that slope? Well, it really boils down to 2 big things. First, just how sensitive are businesses to borrowing costs? And second, something called the multiplier effect, which is basically how much an initial boost in spending gets amplified as it ripples through the economy, as new income for one person becomes spending for another. But hey, interest rates aren't the only force out there. Sometimes an external shock hits the system that, well, it forces us to redraw the entire map. And this is where the idea of autonomous spending comes into play. This is spending that happens for reasons totally separate from income or interest rates. Think about a massive government project to build new roads, or just a sudden wave of consumer confidence that gets everyone out there spending more freely. When this kind of autonomous spending goes up, it doesn't just move us to a new point on the curve. No, it shifts the entire curve over to the right. So what does a shift like that actually mean? It means that now, at the exact same interest rate we had before, the total output of the economy is higher. This is exactly why things like government stimulus can be so powerful. They fundamentally change the entire economic landscape. The real takeaway here is that this one simple downward-sloping line is an incredibly powerful lens. It lets us see the delicate balance point for the entire market of goods and services, where total spending perfectly equals total income. And this brings us right back to our original question, doesn't it? The IS curve gives us a clear, solid framework for understanding why falling interest rates and a shrinking economy so often go hand in hand during a recession. But remember, it's just the first half of a much bigger economic story. The IS curve is an absolutely foundational concept, but it also raises a much bigger question. If we can map the economy with tools this elegant, can we ever perfectly control it? Because knowing the map is one thing, but actually steering the ship is something else entirely. And that really highlights both the power and the limits of economic policy.